One of the nice things is I've been doing this for a little while. Then I can come up here and bring your neck back down to this, kind of give you a little bit of relaxing in there. So again, so grateful that Brent is taking this role on, and didn't he do a great job? They did a great job. They did. So I was clapping on the one song. It was a good clapping song, and so I just maybe I should have came forward and started doing that clap thing, But feel free to engage. The more you can engage that, man, the more energy you will receive back. Does that make sense? And so, well, this morning we're going to be talking about a topic that all of us are familiar with. Um, if we were to take a poll and say, how many of you like change? There would be, well, probably of big change or little change. Because the very thought of change for some folks, it carries a variety of emotions. For some, it's fear, anxiety, grief, some confusion. For others, man, it's excitement, it's anticipation, it's enthusiasm. It depends on the circumstances, right? As far as what kind of change is it, what kind of change that's occurring. We know that change is constant within our lives. We've all experienced change. Um, some of you have experienced all different kinds of change, and for some of you, it's been hair change, right? We try to keep up with the colors of hair maybe that you've got, or styles, or those kind of things, or even the styles that we live in. All the different varieties of clothing. I happened to be in Minneapolis this week for a couple of days, and while I was there, I noticed I was at the Mall of America. Anybody ever been to the Mall of America, the biggest one? Yeah, amazing place. Um, and I'm walking around and I see tube tops. All of a sudden, it's like, back again? Was it to the extent of the 72 tops? They were a little bit, okay, covered more area. But it was kind of like, what is that? And so those styles change, all those kind of things. If you want to really see change, depending upon how old you are, go back and look at your graduation pictures, right? Your times when you were in high school or whatever, when you were sporting the mustache or whatever that was. So change isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? While you're sitting here during this message, over 500,000 cells in your body will die and be replaced by more. And so I think that's pretty cool. You're kind of renewing yourself while sitting there. You thought you were just sitting there listening to a message, and actually some other things. Your skin replaces itself every month. Your stomach lining undergoes a complete change every 5 days. Your liver every 6 weeks. Your skeletal structure will make changes every 3 months. It's kind of a natural aging process, right, that we kind of go through as we get older and hopefully wiser. Isaac Newton said this about change. He said, the law of motion states this: everything continues in a state of rest unless it is compelled to change by forces impressed upon it. Everyone in this room, is either experienced or is experiencing a change. We changing out the packs? All right. Now, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Good. Hopefully you could hear me earlier. But did I finish the motion and change? Everything continues in a state of rest unless it is compelled to change by forces impressed upon it. Like I said, everyone in this room experiences changes. It could be a career change. Hopefully it's of our own, doing, the career change happens. It could be a change of a position within where we work. It could be a promotion, or it could be not a promotion. It could be a change in relationships. You could have a boyfriend today and maybe not tomorrow, a girlfriend. All of a sudden you've got that girlfriend. It can be a marriage. You finally, maybe you got engaged and now you're getting married. And the excitement of that first year of marriage, you talking about change, woo! That's there. I'm going to pull this away a little bit. And so, you've got that. And sometimes changes come when we're not married any longer, whether it's the death of a spouse or a divorce. The birth of a child, we've probably had this said to us when we were younger, maybe like you, and then we say it. It's just something that's said all the time. You see that young couple, you meet that young couple or whatever, and she's pregnant with their first baby. And what is it we tell them, parents that have been around for a while? Your life is about to change. And they just politely nod and go, yeah, okay, sure, whatever. And then they have that little one, and they go, oh my gosh, they didn't say that strong enough. Our life has definitely changed. Maybe it's going to a new school, maybe it's a new grade, maybe whatever that is, but change is constant within our lives. And so here's the question. The question is how do we deal with big changes in life? How do we do this? How do we cope with unexpected change? Change that may be forced upon us. How do we learn to cope with change in a way that is best for us, is in a positive way that has maybe the least negative impact or whatever? How do we embrace that change and come out hopefully a little bit stronger on the other side of it? And so we're going to take a look today. If you have your Bibles, turn with me to Daniel chapter 1. Daniel chapter 1, Old Testament, in case you're not familiar with it. Flip through there, you'll find Daniel. If you don't know where it's at, start in the table of contents and go down to D. And so Daniel chapter 1, we're gonna take a look at his life and change. Whoo, you're talking about some change. This guy, he experienced some change that was forced upon him. Some of the things that he did, that he embraced, that helped with that change. Now, let me give you a little bit of history. About 605 BC, depending on which historian you're looking at, gives you different history there. But the children of Israel, they had this covenant with God. Remember, it goes all the way back to Moses. And they have this, what's called the Sinai. And essentially, this is when the 613 laws was presented to the people. And God said, all right, here's the deal. You obey the commands, and I will bless you. You obey, you follow me, you keep your eyes on me, and I will bless you. Okay? And they're like, sounds good, we can do that. But over time, we see, as you read, over and over again, we said, and the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord again. And so they would go away from God. And so by this time, the children of Israel, different idols and gods of other nations, of other things, embracing their own deal, their own plans, their own thing. And God says, you know what? I told you. I told you what the covenant, what the contractual agreement that we had, and you're not following it. So the blessings are being taken away. And he steps back. And as he steps back, the power nation of the time, Babylon, steps in. And King Nebuchadnezzar and his army come in, and they besiege the city of Jerusalem. And eventually they will overtake the city. People will die. And the children of Israel are now under the rule of King Nebuchadnezzar. Not only does he take rule over the people, they go into the temple, the very temple where, God, the Ark of the Covenant, all of this is where the worship occurred to the one and only God. They go into this temple like it ain't no big deal. This was the Holy of Holies to the children of Israel. And they walk in and they go, hey, that looks like value. Let's take these candlesticks. Let's take some of this. And they begin to take all of the things of value of this. And here's what this represented to all of the nations. You see, when you go into the other nations' gods' temples and you take whatever you want, essentially what you're saying is is our God is greater than your God. Our God is greater than your God. You can't trust your God anymore. Your God's not as strong as our God, you know. And so that's the signal that is being sent here. And so King Nebuchadnezzar, he's different. He's developing some different strategies. And essentially, instead of destroying all the people and just taking over the real estate, he says, what we're going to do. Some special thing. We're going to transition them. And we're going to bring them into the work of our service because we want the smartest and the brightest, and we think it can make Babylon even better. And so that's exactly what they did. They bring in a group of people out of Jerusalem, and they take them and they put them what's called exile. Essentially, you know, some of them are slaves, some of them are selected. And so how does that selection occur? He takes 4 people that we're very familiar with. If you've been in church all your life or part of your life and you've heard the stories, you'll recognize some of these names, maybe not in this form. But they have Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And they take these 4 young men, and they're selected for a special service. But here's the thing. They are now ripped away from their families. They are now taken and placed in a strange land. And here's what happens. Daniel chapter 1, verse 1. Let's see what they say here. It said, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. Sounds familiar. And this is kind of interesting. We can zip past this and kind of miss this. But look who says, all right, you can do this. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, into Nebuchadnezzar's hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off in the treasure house of God. I mean, is God like up there like, I can't believe they took my stuff. I told them to make those things. I can't believe they're doing this. I can't believe they think that their gods are bigger than my gods. We do not serve an insecure God. Okay? This is part of God's plan. And we'll see this later on. And I encourage you, we're only going to look at a small part of this. I encourage you, and if this kind of piques your interest a little bit, read further on, and you'll begin to see why God did and allowed what He allowed. And so, God's not bothered by this, not one bit. Now, the people are. The children of Israel kind of are. Like, what happened to our God? Our God's supposed to be big and strong, and what's going on here? Verse 3. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family of nobility. All right? And then he gives a list. The king says, here's a list of qualities I want you to look for. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude of every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and the literature of who? One more time. Wake up. The language and the literature of who? Oh, man, that's so much better. I mean, wake up. Okay. So, the Babylonians, exactly. And so, imagine for that moment. You're ripped from your country. Imagine you're taken into a complete foreign land. And now you're being judged, graded, whatever that is, to see if you make the cut. And the stuff you're going to be studying, well, it's about the Babylonians, not your history. There's a transition coming. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. That doesn't sound bad, does it? They were to be trained for how many years? 3 years. And after that, they were to enter the king's service. In other words, if they made the cut. And so Nebuchadnezzar's plan, and it's actually a pretty ingenious plan. He says, I want some very bright and smart people. I don't care if they come from somewhere else, because we're going to take these young minds and we're going to shape them to think how we think and to do as we do and to embrace our culture, to embrace our ways, to embrace, and be Babylonian. That's what we want them to do. We're going to teach them our language. We're going to teach them our literature of the Babylonians. We're going to transform these young men to be not Israelites, not worship whatever the god that was that we just conquered, but Babylonians. And so their ways were so much different. The sacrifices that they made and the way, it was just so much different. Now, this seemed kind of strange to me. That let me see if I got this right, God. You're going to have your people, basically, in order to bring them back to you, you're going to have them enslaved. You're going to have them, be exposed to a whole different culture, to be trained in a whole different culture. The brightest and all. God, does that not make any sense to anybody else? God, do you sure know you know what you're doing? Isn't that what we kind of ask sometimes? God, are you sure you know what you're doing in this transition and change? And God would confidently say, yep, I got it covered. I got it covered. So, let's see what happens. We get in verse 6, we get a partial list of the people that are inducted into this program, if you will. He said, among these were some from Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, let's take a look at these guys here just for a second. And I think we would all agree there is a big change about to occur in these guys' lives. They are moved from Jerusalem to Babylon, which Babylon would be in modern-day Iraq, just outside of Baghdad, okay? They're being moved. If you flew there, it's about 580 miles. Travel there, their way of travel was about 1,600 miles away from what they know to what they don't know. They may have heard some things about Babylon, because Babylon, I think it was a beautiful place. What history tells us, I think it was fairly modernized for that era of time. I think they were the superpower. They had some things going on. They had all kinds of different things happening, but it was so different than what these young men were used to. And the king says, you know what, we're going to feed you some of the king's food, which you kind of go, that can't be bad, right? The problem is this food was sacrificed to their gods, and then would be eaten by the king and whoever he had it distributed to. And so, big no-no for the Jewish person. They also had dietary laws of kosher. There were certain things they could eat and certain things that they couldn't eat. And so this was huge. And so here's these guys. These guys had some big changes coming in their lives. And they were going to have to figure out, how do we navigate this? How do we navigate this in a way that we keep our heads? We still get to stay alive and still make a difference in some way, shape, or form. So, the Babylonians, their job was to strip away everything these guys knew and to convert them to their way of thinking, to their way of life. And so we would term it as, brainwash them to their beliefs, to their cultures. And so here's one of the first things that they did. Verse 7. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. We go, oh yeah, now I recognize that name, right? To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azariah, Abednego. Now, we can read past this and kind of go, oh, what's the big deal about that? You begin to change who people are and what you call them and what you are known as. That's a great way to start. And so here's how this works for them. You see, in this culture, and there's still cultures that do this, a name had a meaning. It meant something. They were given a name. Now we just kind of pick a name that seems kind of cool or different, and we spell it different, or we give it a twist or backwards, or there's just some bizarre names out there. Yeah, and so here they are. They're going to change the name of what their names mean. Let me give you an example. Daniel in Hebrew meant God is my judge. In other words, I can look to God. I can trust God. And they change his name to Belteshazzar, which means lady, protect the king. They gave him a girl's name. Now, this is going to date me, and some of you young people, you can Google this later on. Remember the Johnny Cash song where a boy named Sue? Remember that song? You know, and if you've never heard or whatever, you got to listen to it. You know, the dad says, I knew I wasn't going to be in his life, and so I, named him Sue to make him tough. You know, and it's part of my favorite. But here's the thing. What are they doing here? It doesn't stop there. Hananiah in Hebrew means Yahweh, which is another name for God, that God has been gracious. In other words, that God is for you. God is for you. He is for you. And he changes it to Shadrach. I am fearful of God. In other words, there's this fear. There's the scary gods out there. They're gods. You know, they can be scary. You know, you should be living in fear. And then Meshach, let's go to Azariah in Hebrew. Azariah in Hebrew means Yahweh. In other words, God has helped you. In other words, God is for you. And they changed his name to Abednego, which means servant of Nebo. And so this is one of the Babylonian gods. And so what they're doing is basically they're saying you're nothing, you're nobody. You are now. And we're going to start from there, and we're going to build you back up. And so they had a way of what they wanted to do this. So all their names are changed to tear them down. So what do you do? What do you do as strange men? Be against what you believed, what you've taught, and what you've heard all growing up. Do you conform? Do you just kind of go with the flow and figure, I'll figure out how to navigate this, somehow or another? Or do you try to figure out how to navigate this without losing yourself, without losing your faith, without losing your belief in trusting in the God? What do you do? Well, here's what Daniel and them did. In this time of transition, and we find ourselves many times in the same similar place in times of transition when crisis is upon us. What do we do in those moments? Daniel says this, verse number 8. But Daniel resolved. And this word that is used here, it would be essentially like being determined on steroids. In other words, I'm going to give every bit of me to make this happen. Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. To which we kind of go, it's just food, Daniel. It's just food. I've eaten some really bizarre stuff. It's just food. It was so much more than that to them. It was so much. It was that one next step. It was that one next step of moving them further away from what they knew in their God. So he's resolved. And so he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Verse number 9. Don't go skimming past this too fast, because here's what we discover. Now God had caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel. You see, if I'm Daniel, if I'm these other guys, and I've been moved 1,600 miles away from my home to a place that is so different, and my world has been turned upside down, and I've watched friends and loved ones possibly killed. I've been stripped from anybody that God, are you still around? God, how do you let bad things happen to good people? I mean, come on, God. What's going on? Are you still there? Hello, hello, hello. Have you ever prayed at times at change or crisis within your life, and you wondered if your prayers were just bouncing off the ceiling, and you were wondering, is God still there? I have. I've been there. And I'm guessing I'm going to be there again at some point or another in my life. And here they are. And God's like going, look, I'm operating in the background. I've got this thing under control. I've got a plan. You can't see it yet, but it's unfolding. So, he says, now God had caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, he goes, look, man, I don't want to change the food. He goes, I'm afraid of my Lord, the king, who has assigned your food and drink. It's his orders. Why should he see you looking worse than the young man your age? So the king would have my head for this. In other words, I'm afraid for my life. If I change anything like this and things don't go well, this is bad stuff. So for him to make this transition, for him to step into this, to agree to this, is huge, huge deal. So, verse 11, Daniel says to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, still want to make sure you know who this guy is, over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Verse 12. Please, please, please. It's not, don't you know who I am? I'm a child of the God. No, it's please test your servant days. 10. For 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink, and then compare our appearance to that of the other young men who have eaten the royal food. And then treat your servants in accordance with what you see. Give us 10 days. And if there's not a difference, we'll go back. Can you give us 10 days? And I love this power of negotiation. Your kids ever do that with you? That power of negotiation sometimes with you, We used to kind of squash it with our kids for a while. I said no and I mean no. Don't ask me again. After a while we kind of thought, I think this could be helpful for us in life. And so we still told him, no, but it was helpful. But he's negotiating. So he agrees to the 10 days. You see, Daniel were now going to experience it in real life for themselves. And so, I think that Daniel and the guys would grow by leaps and bounds in these changes and in these crises of their life. And we see it. We see it later on. If you continue to read on, you'll see how much they grow in this process. And so, here's what they learned. They learned to look up and pray to their God about their situation. Jesus would tell his disciples, he'd tell his disciples, as he's got the guys around, he goes, look, he goes, when you pray, he goes, bring your request to God, who already knows them before you ever even ask them. That's the kind of God that he is. He already knows, but he loves it that you bring those requests to him. They would learn that God is in control. That even though their temple had been ransacked, even though they had taken all those things that was in their temple and had placed it in the temple of the other gods, and in that culture and in that thinking process was that their gods was greater than your God. That wasn't the case for our God. We didn't believe that. We're not buying into that. And we're going to not only test you, O chief official, we're going to test our God in this. And so those of you with little kids, this is your verse. All right? Eat your vegetables. God says it's better for you. You know, eat your vegetables. All right? Can you imagine what happened to these guys? Can you imagine what happened to these guys when their faith intersected with God's faithfulness? Couldn't you imagine when they stood there in that line with all those other guys and the chief officials like, oh my gosh, you guys, I mean, this is extremely noticeable. You guys look great. You know, and the other guys are like, what are you doing? I mean, we do that, right? You know, what have you been doing? You've lost weight. You look all, you know, buff and all that other stuff. What are you doing? I mean, and so they're like going, man, we chose to follow the ways of God. And so their faith intersected with God's faithfulness. But done. God's not done here. So they're being fed this, right? They decide to look up to God, you know, to loosen up a little bit, you know, and to trust a God who's got things under control. Verse 17. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge. Who gave knowledge to them? God. He is still in the mix. He is still involved. God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. You start reading Daniel and you start getting way, you know, a little bit deeper into it, and your head starts spinning. All right? Just a little warning there. You see, that occurs within these guys. Their faith gets bigger. Their courage begins to become, you know, bolder. Their character. They're just that to them. Their names that they were born with and given is what they believe in. Verse 18. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them in. How many years was it? 3. Good. Just testing to see if you remembered. This was the other part of the, you know, surprise test. So the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, this is the deal. This is the big test. This is, are you in? Are you out? You know, biting his guy's going to make the cut. The king talked with them. So he's talking with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. And we go, yay, that's great. Wait. We're not done yet. Questioned them. Found them how much smarter? 1 time? 2 times? 10 times better than all the magicians and all the enchanters in his kingdom. The chief official would see something different in these guys. Yeah, you know, they got their God stuff stored in over here, but I'm thinking there's something to this God. Nebuchadnezzar would discover who this God is. Also, it would be a little bit later on. They had their address changed, their career path was changed, their names were changed, but they knew who they were in God. They knew who they were. Alexander the Great, one of the great warriors of the in front, who had ran away during the battle. Alexander the Great asked him, he said, "What is your name, young man?" And he said, "Alexander." Alexander again the Great asked him, "What is your name, young man?" And he said, "It's Alexander, sir." Alexander a third time said, "What is your name?" He said, "It's Alexander." And Alexander the Great told him, he said, "Either change your ways or change your name. Change your ways or change your name." You see, these young men had a choice. They had a choice to trust, to follow, to believe in the one and only true God that had proved himself faithful, in the lives of others. And now they had the opportunity in the crisis and change of life that they were in to be able to see God at work. They couldn't see it as it was happening, as it was unfolding in the moments at times, but they trusted anyway. They trusted anyway. They trusted anyway. And their faithfulness intersected with God's faithfulness. You see, God gives each and every one of us a new name when we cross that line of faith. We call ourselves Christians. We call ourselves Christ followers. We call ourselves, child of God. We call ourselves forgiven or redeemed. We have become adopted by God, and we have the inheritance that He has given us. An opportunity for a relationship with Him. But there are times we forget who we are. Sometimes we forget whose we are. That we are God's child. If you've crossed that line of faith, and if you haven't, I hope that someday you do experience what so many others have experienced. That when our faith intersects with God's faithfulness, big things can happen. Jesus would say it this way. He would say, look, Matthew chapter 6, verse 33. He said, but seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. What's all these things? I don't know. I don't know what you need in that moment. But He says, all these things, come to me first. Yeah, you can't see it maybe in the moment, in the midst of all of the turmoil and the crisis, but you can see it. God at work. And many times it's after we get on the other side of it and we look back and we go, wow, man, and our faith is built up. Some of you right now are going through big changes in your life. Some of you right now, you're going through changes and you're kind of going, I don't even know what to do. You're in a crisis mode. And God wants to show you some things about Himself in this time. That He is still there in the middle of it all. And that He is still at work in all of it. That God is the faithful God. And when our faith intersects with God's faithfulness, we see a change in us like no other. Our faith is built stronger. And we see God do incredible things, and others see that process also and are drawn to that. You see, change comes within our lives. It's inevitable. Change is coming in our life, in mine and Kim's life, in our family. That change will impact you also. I will be retiring as your pastor. It will happen sometime in September will be our final date. We don't have an exact date set yet. Kim has retired out of the youth ministry. Not because she's old. She told me to make sure that you knew that. But not because she's old. Even though she says I'm older and tireder than what I have been. We have known this for 4 months. Let me say back up. About 3 months. A little over 2.5, 3 months. Somewhere in there. We knew this was not something that just spare the moment thing. This is something that it is something that we both came to that decision. There's a joke that goes with pastors, that every Monday you quit. There are times of discouragement. There's just times that are difficult. Ministry is hard. And so after 2015 with the tornado, prior to that, being bivocational, I had a good rhythm of things that was able to find that time of rest as summer began, and to be able to fill those tanks that people in leadership have, and all of us have to a certain degree of our physical tanks, our spiritual tanks, our mental tanks, and even our vision tanks. And after that year, man, I couldn't catch back up. You guys gave me an opportunity to take a sabbatical, to kind of step away from preaching for a few months, and it was helpful. It was. But I just couldn't get back. I couldn't see past, bless you, I couldn't see past today to get me ready for tomorrow. And if I couldn't do that for myself at times, I couldn't do it for you. And so, we explored all different kinds of options in this. The other thing we came to the conclusion of was, it's just time. And that was the words that Kim used. She goes, I think it's just time. And I had been there sooner than she had. And so I wasn't going to make a decision without her agreement with it, because I think that's how God works at times, in timing and all of that. And so we made this decision together. We sat down with the kids, being our 6 adult kids, or 4 adult kids, there's 6 with us, and told them the decision we had made and said, look, you guys make your own decisions. This is what God has led us to do. You go from there. And so in that process, Cassie and Charlton had been praying about it, and they had decided, he felt like, this is my time also. This is my time to go ahead and go. And so we feel a lot of different areas and gaps, and so we needed to fill those gaps, and that way there wasn't those gaps. We needed to get through the big events of camps, of Freedom Celebration, of VBS, before we had something that caught our attention somewhere else. We needed to pour our attention into those areas of ministry. And so we began developing an exit plan, if you will. And so here's the thing, and I may have already said this, and forgive me if I repeat it. We're not mad at anybody. We're not upset about anything. If anybody's upset with us or mad at us, then keep it to yourself, because we don't know about it yet. All right? We're clueless. We really are. I'm not going anywhere else. And I say I'm not going anywhere else. I have no plans on going anywhere else. You guys are the only place I would want to be as pastor. You have given 16 years to our family while being lead pastor, the greatest peace a pastor could ever have, of just focusing on ministry and doing what you do best. Believe me, I listen to other pastors and their horror stories and all these kind of things, and I go, I'm glad I don't have that problem. I'm glad I don't have those people. I'm glad I don't. Because you guys have focused on what's most important, and that's advancing the kingdom of God, and that's where we've been pouring our attention into. Not that we don't have our we're people. We have our little things. I know I've got critics. I do. Anybody in leadership has critics. Somebody want to do it differently or do it some other way or whatever, and that's okay. That's part of that dynamic. But here's the thing. Here's what I know. I know this place is a gold mine. It is set right here in the middle of Bridge Creek community, and you have weathered many a storms. Survived it, and not only have you survived it, you've thrived past it. I'm excited about the next season for you and what God's going to do. Because here's the thing. God's got the next person already picked out. It's just going to be your job to find out who that is, to discover that. And in that process, it's change. And in that process, you're going to get to see God do some incredible things within this body of believers. And you're going to get an opportunity to see God at work. It's like you have so many other times. And you continue to advance and to pour into each other. Is this sad? Absolutely. It took me the first month of just saying it to myself to not cry, because you guys mean so much. There's so many memories that are there for us. Be staying on as ministry assistant until we get the new person in, or until you guys say, we got somebody else, we're done here, whatever. She's there to help with the everyday workings of what goes on around here. Nobody knows it better than she does at this point. And then when it's time, she will go. And so we want to spend the next few weeks with you, pour into some basically some highlights of some messages that, man, I know informational, and maybe for you, some things that we poured into each other. And so we'll celebrate our time left. We're not done with ministry. Our ministry will continue. And so we love you guys. Man, you guys have helped us raise our kids for the last 30 years plus. You've helped us raise some of our grandkids. And so, you know, we've got a lot invested here. You've invested in us, and we are so grateful for that. And so, like I said, it doesn't come without a heavy heart, and it doesn't come easy. And so, again, don't go, well, I'm done. All right? Statistics tell us that 10% of your regular attenders, that's our family, the 10%. The rest of you have to stay. Okay? You got to stay. As for you, don't miss it. I know after we pray and we're dismissed, it's whatever, it's okay. It's okay. I'm not going to be back at the door and kind of, you walk by and go, I don't know what to do. All right? There'll be plenty of time for that. I get it. I do. So let's pray.